Episode 47 of The Human Experience is Kathy's story. Kathy is an award-winning philanthropist, author, speaker, and she just recently launched her podcast called What's Your Whisper? Kathy's first book, The 100-Story Home, was written after she had a radical life shift, wherein she quit her job to begin serving the chronically homeless in her community, culminating in her helping to raise $10 million to build Charlotte's first permanent supportive housing. Though her background is in graphic design, these days Kathy spends her time writing, with 3 nonfiction books and 2 children's books published, coaching, teaching, and helping others find their whisper. As Kathy describes it, your whisper is your why. It's what you were meant for in this life. Links to Kathy's website, her books, and her podcast can be found in the show notes. This episode was recorded in Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance. So I do want to start with your first book, The 100-Story Home, because that was your intro into authorship, correct?
Yes. I considered myself an accidental author. I never intended to write a book. I just had a story that I really wanted to tell. And my first draft of that book, my husband said, well, honey, it's not a page turner. So I spent 4 years trying to figure out how not to get a good story lost in a bad book. And I figured out, how do you become a writer and what does that mean? And then I learned the hard part of publishing. So it was an accidental journey in writing that has become what I discover I love so much. Yeah. So yes, now I'm a very intentional writer. I will be putting out my 5th book next year. I teach other women in particular how to write and how to publish because the publishing journey is very long and very convoluted. So.
Yeah. And how do you publish? Because I know there's multiple.
Yes, I've done both. So I like to say I've done 4 books 3 ways. So I've done the independent self-publishing route. I've also done traditional. I've gotten 2 book contracts now. And then I've also done hybrid publishing. And hybrid generally means that they're the things, especially on my children's book, that are more complicated to figure out. How do you get those illustrations? How do you do the digital scans? So you pay someone who has expertise with that to figure it out. And I did that one time. And now I'm doing a second children's book on my own self-publishing. Okay. Yeah.
And how has that been?
Fun.
Yeah.
Well, I'm an ex-graphic designer. So when I'm doing the books, I really care about the illustrations and the design and how they look. So for me, it's really fun to partner with an illustrator, and it's a collaboration. And I just love it. I mean, it's one of the most fun things I do. So.
Yeah, I imagine as you have walked down this road, and you gain your confidence with every project that you complete. It just has become such a passion and something to pour into for you.
Yes, I think I wouldn't have imagined that I would be a writer or an author, especially not a published one. In 2010, I made a promise to myself, a New Year's Eve resolution, that I was going to write something longer than an email. And I think now, 13 years later, that decision to write really saved my life. I not only discovered what I think, but it also connected me to so many different people and in all kinds of new avenues of not only writing, but teaching and being with other, particularly women who like to write. And that has just been life-giving to me.
Yeah, I imagine. That's fantastic. And I love specifically that you are with other women, helping them to find their purpose.
Yes.
They're, as you say, at Whisper,
yes.
which we'll get into.
Okay.
But your first book, The 100-Story Home, I would love for you to talk about that because you've done a lot of work that was the catalyst for that book.
Yes.
So you were very involved in the homeless community in Charlotte.
Yes.
Why? What got you involved?
I think what got me involved is I was raised to do good. I was raised in El Paso, Texas, by parents who were really believed in servant leadership. They were involved in our church. And I really thought that giving back and having that lesson to my own 4 daughters was really important. And one way I found that was serving in the soup kitchen. So that's why I found my way to the soup kitchen for people experiencing homelessness. But I know your podcast is about people having a moment that changed everything. And for me, that moment was in 2007. I had been working at the soup kitchen or volunteering for almost 10 years. And I organized a fundraiser for that soup kitchen, which is a longer story. It's all in the 100-Story Home book. But I had a crazy idea that I should bring these authors, Ron Hall and Denver Moore, to speak in Charlotte for a fundraiser. And because I was doing that, I was taking Denver Moore on a tour of the soup kitchen. And I was expecting him to say what an amazing job we were doing. I thought what we were doing in Charlotte was first-rate homeless services. And I was showing him everything that we were doing. We had an art program, we had a soccer program, we had a garden program, not to make happier homeless people, but to gain trust and to build relationships. And I thought he would see that and say, well done, good job. But I'm giving him that tour and we're walking through and he's not saying anything. And it was really uncomfortable. And I was watching his face and he was really looking like he was wrestling with something, but he didn't want to say it. And we finally got to the end of the tour and he said, can we go upstairs now? And I said, well, there's nothing up there. There's just offices. And he said, well, where are the beds? And I said, oh, no, you weren't listening on my tour. Like, we're a soup kitchen. We're a day ministry. We don't. And he interrupted me back and he said, wait, you mean to tell me you do all this good in the day and you lock them out to the bed at night? I said, yeah, I guess, now that you mention it. He says, does that make any sense to you? And I got to say, I'd been volunteering for 10 years. I thought I was doing good. I thought I was serving soup and that was, somewhat important. But when someone shows it to you that way, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah. And
then he asked me the one thing that changed everything forever. He said, are you going to do something about it?
Wow.
And that was my moment, right? Because I was 44. I was really looking for purpose in life. I was a graphic designer. I had a business, but I knew that there was something more that I needed to do with my life. I certainly didn't think it was solving homelessness because what could, a mom do anything about that? I was not qualified. But once he showed it to me that way, there was no way I could unsee it. And that just fast forwarded a string of decisions. I quit my job. I went to go work for that soup kitchen that had a pilot program for a housing program. I figured out what we should do, which was a housing first model, which was happening in other cities across the country. And we started with a pilot program where we housed 13 people. And we realized, oh my gosh, when you give someone who's experiencing homelessness the one thing they need, which is a home, lots happen.
Yeah.
And so from there, we built a building. We raised $10 million. And that's the basis of the book, The 100-Story Home. It's all of those series of decisions that led up to finally doing the right thing, giving people what they needed, which was a home, and telling that story. Because I think while I thought I was helping other people find homes, I was really finding my own way home and finding my way into my path and what I was meant to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Your story reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by the abolitionist William Wilberforce. He said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you may never again say that you did not know."
Yes.
And I think so often we kind of like to turn that blind eye of, like ignorance truly is bliss in a way, right?
Yes.
If I don't know about it, then I cannot be held responsible for it.
Right. It's not my problem.
Right. And so I also think there is, I also believe in you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
But there comes that crossroads when you are confronted with new information. What are you going to do with it?
Right.
And I think it's very incredible that you chose to take that and run with it instead of say, it's somebody else's problem. I don't have the resources to do that. That's too big for me.
Oh, I tried, Jen. I tried. If I tried not to answer that call, and I will say there's a chapter in my book called Crazy or Called, and I didn't want to be either one. I came from a background, I said my parents were servant leaders and really did a lot of good things in El Paso, Texas. But I also came from a home where my mother suffered a bipolar disorder. And so I'd watched her literally have voices in her head and outside. And at one point, I really started thinking, I wonder if this idea that I'm somehow going to solve or work on homelessness is truly delusional. Why do I think that I can do this? And on the flip side, I was feeling so drawn to this and so called to it. Well, why would that be true either? Like if and I was really wrestling with what I believe in faith and what I believe in God. Well, why would God call me like the graphic designer soccer mom? Like why in the world am I getting handed this? But I finally realized it was neither. I wasn't crazy. And, I was called, but we're all called. And that's where I come into this language of the whisper. I think each one of us have something that's imprinted on our heart that we come into the world with. And at some point, it really hits you square between the eyes, and you can take that first step towards it, even if you don't understand what it is or what you're being called to. But you can take that first step in trust, thinking, I am so pulled to this, I'm gotta try.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me. I had no idea that saying yes to heading that pilot program was going to lead to being in charge of a $10 million capital campaign and building a building, which then led to working on, some other, philanthropic projects in Charlotte where I was raising money and building buildings, to becoming an author and really encouraging other people to follow their whispers. But all of that happened from that first step and that first moment with Denver, where as you said, I couldn't not see. I couldn't say I didn't know.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do about it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, you may have struggled, but you got there, which is more than a lot of people can say sometimes. So it is really important. It is really important to follow through, even if the road to get there is messy, right? Like even if you didn't say yes right away, it's still important that you said yes.
Oh, I tried to go back to sleep. I tried to roll over. I tried to go back to my sleepy life and
you were Jonah.
Yeah, doing what I was capable of. I was very capable of being a graphic designer and keeping my business, but it ultimately wasn't what I was called to do.
Yeah.
So you sometimes have to put down what you're capable of and pick up what you're completely unqualified to do, which I do think is the mark of a whisperer. I think it's uncomfortable, and I think you feel unqualified, and you think that it's a little bit irrational to follow, but at the same time, it's insistent, and it will not let you go. So you either have to take a step towards it or pretend you never heard it. And that whisper was not going away. I would go to sleep at night and think, well, what if? What if I did something? And at the same time, our ministry had been given a grant to try something. So we had money for a housing program. I had a whisper that wouldn't let me sleep at night, and someone needed to take that job. Mm-hmm. So it became my job. Yeah. And luckily, Dale Mullinex, who was the executive director of the Soup Kitchen, gave me a chance. When I was applying for the job, I said, I'm completely unqualified to take this job. Just to be clear, my degree is in graphic design and communications. And he said, well, good news is for you is I haven't seen anyone who's qualified to do this. It's a pilot program, so it's yours if you want it. So I had to take it on,
Absolutely.
So someone took a chance on me at the same time I was taking a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And I think that happens too. I think sometimes when you find your whisper and what you're called to, the dots, as we were talking earlier before we started recording, I think you follow the God dots and connect them towards your path.
Yeah. I Absolutely agree. And I'm definitely feeling encouraged personally as you're talking too. So,
well, good. I love to encourage others to come jump into the craziness and the cold.
Perfect.
And yes, join me in the water. It's deep, but it's great. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So on a practical level, I've worked with several nonprofits. I've done fundraising before.
Yes.
So I know how difficult that is.
Yes.
What was it like for you to jump in to raising? I've never had that price tag on me either, $10 million. What was that like to jump into that, having no prior fundraising experience?
Terrifying. Truly terrifying. And as a graphic designer, I'd worked on a lot of capital campaigns and brochures. So I'd sat on the other side of the table from either nonprofits or educational institutions that had capital campaigns. I was very familiar with the language and what you do and kind of maybe how you approach people. But it was never my job, right? It was never my job on the line item next to that dollar amount of what you were going to do. So it was terrifying. I didn't sleep a lot for a couple years when we were working that because I had such a fear of failure. Yeah. And to me, the price of failing meant people were going to be continuing to die on the streets. I mean, the first year when we went into it, 37 people died on the streets of Charlotte as a result of their homelessness. So the stakes were very high. And we were promising people something that had never been done. This idea of permanent supportive housing, that it works, and that if we do it, then this city would have a solution for this, plague that's not only terrible for people on the streets, but it's also hard for communities to watch people suffer on the streets.
Sure.
So it was really hard, but I think that's another reason I wrote the book, is because there was such, in my mind, a series of miracles that lined up to make it all happen, not to mention that we launched this capital campaign in October of 2008 in a banking city.
Yes.
So Charlotte was suffering. I mean, there were so many people who had lost jobs and stock prices, and the thought that we would actually raise this money in that time period seemed laughable. And it gave me a small excuse of like, well, I guess we can always say it was, this big stock crash, financial crash. It wasn't our fault. It was, these circumstances. But oddly enough, I think it became in our favor, because as we were talking to people, a lot of donors who had maybe never experienced a level of personal hardship equal to being on the streets, all of a sudden had experienced a blindsiding financial crush of their own. And I think that gave people empathy and wanting to help on something that we could provide some hope. So it really did become this community outreach. There was a minister, Steve Eason, and his church pledged $250,000. It was a matching grant, and he gave a really amazing talk one day as they announced their gift. And he said, we can live in a city that has lost jobs. We can live in a city that has dropped stock prices. We cannot live in a city that has lost compassion. And I think that was the message to this city during that time, is that people wanted to be compassionate, and they showed up in extraordinary ways, from $10 gifts to $1 million gifts. And we raised that money.
Wow. And what was your time frame for that?
We did it in, I'll have to look back and read my own book, but I think, because that was...
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it for anybody.
But it was about a year.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, building the building took longer, obviously,
sure.
But we had the money within about a year, and which was miraculous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Again, I've been involved in nonprofits, so that is miraculous. That's fantastic.
And I always thought that was the end game. I thought, well, that's what I was meant to do. That's what this whisper was about. And then I've written in a different book how some friends said, well, we want to talk to you about how you did that, how you raised the money and built what is now called More Place, because they were feeling called to do something about mental health. And as I told you, I came from a background of that, and I ended up, we just finished More Place. I was wondering what I should do and how I was going to take all this knowledge of fundraising and development. What was it for? And I ended up helping them and coming together with a whole nother group that we raised $27 million and opened Charlotte's first residential mental health treatment center called Hopeway, which is its own amazing miracle beacon of hope story.
Wow.
That 5 families, came together, 5 original board members that expanded to 12, and none of us had any psychiatric or therapeutic experience, but every single one of us had experienced something with mental health, and we knew how hard it was to find care. And we came together, and again, this community, which I think Charlotte is unbelievable, came together and built that, and that has opened in 2016.
Wow, that's beautiful. So are you still involved in these places?
I'm involved with what's now called Roof Above, which is our homeless service organization, and it runs More Place as well. We just also did another capital campaign for $40 million that we opened more permanent supportive housing. So I'm still involved in that. And then on Hopeway, I serve on the advisory board.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
But both of those are more part-time, just volunteer. And what I do kind of full-time now is write, teach, and hopefully the ripple effect. I'm so interested in the ripple effect of encouraging other people who feel like, well, I can't do that. And if I can be like Denver was for me, if I can look someone in the eye and say, but what if you did?
Yeah.
What if you tried? That is what I think kind of my next call is, to be an encouragement to people, whether they want to write books. I do book coaching and help people, write and do actual next chapters, but I like to work on people's metaphorical next chapters.
Sure.
What's calling you? If you're retiring, what is it you're meant to do now? So I try to do a lot of that work now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you've built that Charlotte has such a great community feel, but that you've also built that up around you as well. So
I do. I have a website called Women, Faith, and Story, and that's where I teach and coach and lead workshops and retreats. And I am very focused on women. Sorry, any men out there listening, but I do think women need that extra push. They need someone looking them in the eye and saying, you can do it, and what is possible. So I do like to work, especially, second chapters of life is where I like. Although, we was at a retreat this weekend and we have, people who are in their 30s. So
yeah. Well, I'm in my 30s and I'm definitely on my second or third chapter. So
right, I know. Well, I just think there's some old souls who do that. They look for their lives a little bit earlier. But I think especially when you start to get 40, 50, you really start to question what you're doing.
Yeah.
Who you're meant to be, who you can become, what risks should I be taking, and what don't you want to have regrets on? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think too, especially or specifically with women, motherhood is such a huge part of identity when you're in that season of life.
Yes.
And then once you are kind of, you don't move out of motherhood, but once it's not your primary focus, I feel like there could be an identity shift there of, well, what now? What what I have been called to do, mother my children, raise my children, is done. They're done.
They're baked.
Yeah,
I've done what I can do.
Yeah,
I think you're so right, and I think whether it's you've poured the first half of your life into your children, whether you've poured the first half of your life into your career or your community. I think moms, as you were saying, they have all these big dreams for their kids, but they forget what their own are. And they, wake up in their 40s and 50s and they know what they wanted for their sons and daughters, and they've totally disconnected from what they wanted for themselves outside of raising this beautiful family. And there's still so much time left. There's just so much time left. And I think some people think, oh, well, I'm 50, I missed the boat. My friend, Miss Jo, she's in a new book I'm writing. There's a chapter about her. But when she read the 100-Story Home, she reached out to me and she said, well, I really want to do something like this in my hometown of Kingsport, Tennessee. I think I'm really called to do something about homelessness. I want to work on this. Can I come see More Place? And I said, absolutely. So she brought 2 van loads full of people from Kingsport, Tennessee to stand in More Place and envision and dream about building it in Kingsport. And the kicker about Miss Jo was that when she read the 100-Story Home, she was 100 years old. When she came with those 2 van loads full of people. She was 102 years old.
I have chills right now.
When she went home to start a nonprofit, she started that nonprofit at 103 years old. And for the next 2 years, raised the money and got the community dreaming on a place called Grace House. She did pass away at 105, and she asked that all the donations go to Grace House to making that a reality. So if there's anyone out there listening, I don't care how old you are. If you are 70 years old, you have 35 years to do something, to dream your dreams, to start a next chapter, to be a poet, to paint, whatever it is. I just don't think it's ever too late.
Wow. You're right. We have no excuses.
No excuse.
Miss
right?
Jo did it anyway.
Anybody can do it. I know. And I interviewed her. And I just said, what would you say? She said, well, I could have sat home in my rocking chair, but life is so much better when you go out and connect and make something in this world. So, gosh, I hope I can be 105. I don't know that I'll ever be that lucky, but I can sure go out trying, right? And I can't sit in my rocking chair no matter how old or young I am.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Wow. So cool. So then you wrote another book, The Last Ordinary Hour.
Yes. So I was out, I had started speaking, which that's a whole nother thing. I never thought that I would be a speaker. But funny, if you write a book, you have to tell people about it, which means you actually have to get up in front of people and talk about it.
True.
So I started doing that, but I was, even though I was speaking all the time about homelessness and what could be done and, trying to inspire people to do it in their communities, I wasn't talking about what was happening in my own home. And what that was is I have a very healthy husband, and he's a, adrenaline junkie. He hella skis, jumps off of mountains. But in 2013, he had a catastrophic heart attack, and we found out it wasn't heart disease, it was rare disease. And we ended up in a hospital. We weren't in town. We were up in Massachusetts, and he was being rushed by ambulance, to a hospital. We didn't even know where we were going. And we found out that he has something called spontaneous coronary artery dissection, which means it's not just his heart arteries, which his LAD, his main artery, had split and caused a heart attack. But we found out it's every artery in his body, his carotid, his femoral, his iliac, any artery in his body can split at any time, causing a heart attack, stroke. And that's what they tell you. And there's no research, there's no pill. It's a really kind of rare orphan disease. And even in the world, at the time, this was 2013, there was 400 women known to have it in a study at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And when Charlie joined that study, he was one of 10 men. So, wow. And it was 10 men who had survived and 400 women who survived, because mostly people die because they don't get there in time. They don't get to the hospital in time. So we were left with this really scary disease with nothing we could do about it. 2 type A control freak type people who, so yes, this would be my second moment when I had to change everything, because man, I tried to Google our way out of that. I tried to find the best doctors. I tried to control every piece of that, but SCAD is a disease that will not and cannot be controlled, and it will not and cannot be solved. Wow. And so you have to figure out, how are you going to live in this radical uncertainty? And so we hid it for a good 3 years of just not talking about it. And he tried to go on doing what he was doing, which is a very stressful job. And I tried to keep on doing what I was doing. But at some point we had to face that our life had changed. And if we only had a small amount of time possibly together, what do we want to do with it? What choices do we want to make? How do we want to live our life? How do we want to have no regrets? And so we started making a whole different series of choices, which included him retiring from his job. We've always dreamed of a place out west. We started going out to the mountains of Wyoming and spending time out there, and really changing what we thought was important and how we wanted to live. And that is the title, The Last Ordinary Hour. I thought forever that the last ordinary hour was that 60 minutes before he had a heart attack, before I knew that arteries could split and life could change on a dime. Yeah. But I just came to see that, there are no ordinary hours. Every day is precious. Every hour is a gift. And so that book is really about how I found my way into that, a lot with reading and studying other people way smarter than me. There's 35 poets, theologians, philosophers that I talk about their work and quote and how it affected me and how it helped me calm and find a sense of peace with what we were going through. And I'll say that gratefully, my husband is still alive, and we are 11 years into this. I was never going to publish that book. It was for my own writing to know what I think, but he's a very private person. But at one point, I did decide in 2021 that I was going to put it out in the world for other people. Everyone's going through something, right? Some diagnosis or an unexpected death or even an unexpected divorce, end of a marriage, and you are left blindsided and you have to pick up the pieces and figure out, what do I do with my life now? So this book is for them.
Yeah.
And readers who are dealing with uncertainty and unwanted change, and how do you live your life now?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I really do love the title of that book. It captures, I think, exactly what you are trying to convey in, it through the whole book, but in that title. It's hard. It's hard to live like very present. It is very difficult to live in the present.
Yes.
It takes a conscious effort, and I feel like we can move in and out of that based on what's happening, right?
I can be so zen one day,
yeah,
and so like yelling in traffic another. But yeah, I mean, I aspire to be at peace. I know when I've been out talking with book clubs or people around that book, they'll always ask how Charlie is now, and then they'll hint at, well, like, how are you going to feel when he does die? I mean, logic says he's going to die before I am, that this is going to get him at some point. He's still relatively young and healthy, but, logic, science tells me that that's not always going to stay the case. And I would like to think that I can look at all that's happened in the last 11 years. I mean, when this happened, we had kids in high school and college, and he has since walked 2 of our daughters down the aisle. He's lived to meet his first grandchild.
Wow.
If we keep going, he's about to meet his namesake and his second grandson. And so I'd have to think that even if, there'll never be enough time. He'll always, if he dies before me, I'll say it's too soon. But gosh, I hope I can look back and see all the moments that we got in the last 11 years and the way we got to change our life and live our dreams and do things without regret. And so I hope that I will find myself not bitter. I hope I will find myself grateful for that time and not, wishing there was more time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a way it is a gift to know, to be aware of time in a way.
I agree, Jen. Yes.
There is a gifting in knowing what to treasure and what to hold dear. Not that any of it is easy or fair.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
No, but
I do. I've given a talk called Living Life Backwards. And in that, I suggest that people give themselves 2 expiration dates. The first expiration date is maybe one that, either you're worried about might happen to you. For me, the age of 64. My dad died at 64 of leukemia, and I have really always felt that's what was breathing down my neck when I was 44 and looking for purpose in my life. I may have 20 years left, so what am I going to do in those 20 years? So I would say that is my expected expiration date, right? But if I'm lucky enough to live past that, what is my aspirational expiration date? And my aspirational expiration date is Miss Joe, 105, right? Yep. So if I get to pass my dad's date and make it to Miss Joe's date, well, what am I going to do with those like almost 40 years, right?
Wow.
Crazy. So much time. So you live with both, okay, press on, so little time, but also with the hope of so much time.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do with it? And don't waste that either.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you look at it like that, there is, I feel like for so long, the, like 70 was a right. Okay, you're done.
Yeah. If you hit 70, oh gosh.
Yeah. And even like, okay, we know you're gonna live past 70, but
it's not gonna be good years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're not gonna be worth anything. Yeah. And that is such a lie.
Right now, I just turned 60, so this is my 60th.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And so everyone, my friends are all in and out of, different stages of that. But, the 60s are called your go-go years. The 70s are called your slow-go years, and the 80s are called your no-go years.
Oh!
So go-go is like, all right, all those places, if you want to see, go see them now before your hip and knees give out, right? And then you could still maybe do the barge cruise in your 70s, but then by 80, you're going to be staying home.
Yeah.
So I don't know if any of that's true. I hope I know some 80-year-olds who, went and walked Kilimanjaro. So,
Right?
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, get going.
I was talking to a gentleman earlier today. He's 82. He was doing triathlons.
Yes.
After recovering from cancer.
There you go.
I mean, in his 70s, like,
yes.
I'm not doing triathlons now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not either. So yeah, go Bruce.
Right?
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. There is so much life to be had, and I think mentality is a huge part of that.
Yes.
But yeah, so I love that your focus, a lot of your focus is really on those second or third chapters, or however they choose to call it for themselves.
Right.
And
I think we can get caught in our physical selves, right?
Oh, yes.
And so then when something goes wrong with the physical, my husband's a great example. Like, he kind of for a while felt, it's like a dog. You took his ball away. You couldn't chase it anymore. And he was told, you can't run, you can't exercise, you can't do all of those crazy things you used to love doing. The adrenaline junkie was grounded. And he literally, I think at one point, he felt like, well, my life is over. Like, life's not worth living if I can't sweat and have adrenaline. And you know what? He found fly fishing. And he used to make fun of fly fishing. He used to say, this isn't even a sport. This is not a real thing. Why do people do that? And yeah, he fly fishes a lot now. So it's amazing what you find and, can fill your soul when you have to look in different directions.
Yeah.
And you're not that, 20-year-old who can, run up a mountain. So I think that's part of the second half of life too, is finding new parameters, pushing new boundaries, accepting new limits, and seeing what you can do with those limits.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because even though you do have those new limits come for everybody. Yeah. Regardless of whether or not you have gotten sick.
Yes.
Or have an illness.
Yes.
But what you're doing, if you're just saying, okay, that's it, I'm done. Since I can't do this, I'm not going to do anything. Right. I think a lot of times too, like, that's what makes us old. Yes. When we stop.
When you stop, not only when you accept something, when you just allow it to ground you. Yeah. And say, well, that's it. I don't know if you've seen there's a documentary right now with Michael J. Fox. It's called Still, and it's about his Parkinson's disease. He was diagnosed when he was like 27 or 29. Wow. And he's now in his 60s. He's lived with it for 40 years, which is crazy. And how he's not allowed that to limit him. Yeah. It's very inspirational for anyone who's living with a really chronic, tough disease. Yeah. I recommend it.
Absolutely. But agreed, mentality is a huge part of our physical manifestation, I think. Yes. Yeah. So, some things you can't help. My grandmother will be 94 in February. And she was the little social butterfly. Yeah. And then she had a stroke that she'd had strokes before and was fine, but she had a stroke that really limited her. She can't really talk anymore. Oh, I'm sorry. Has trouble walking. But, she's still going. That woman is like, she's the Terminator, I think. So she's...
Well, and I love that she's still in your life, because how all wonderful things that you learned from her, just watching her deal with that, struggle, and how she's faced it, and what a lesson that is for you too.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So you also have you have 2 children's books. One's not out yet, but why did you decide to write children's books?
Well, funny, I didn't. One of my readers did. Okay. I was in Austin, Texas, and I was doing a book club, And there's some twin sisters. One lives in Charlotte and one lives in Austin, and they're both librarians, church librarians. And each one had read the 100-Story Home, and I talked to each of their groups. But one of them, when I was in Austin talking to her group, she said, why don't you do a children's book with the 100-Story Home? I'm always trying to find books for kids that teach lessons, and this would be such a great kids book. And I looked at her and I said, gosh, it took me 6 years to write these 300 pages. I have no idea how I would break that down into a children's story. Do you want to write it? Maybe you write the book. But that it planted that seed, and I started thinking about it. Well, how would I do that? And she is right. It would be a good lesson. And so it was in my head, and I started thinking about it, and I woke up one morning with the idea of oh, I know how I would tell this story. It would be about one little girl, just like my little girls used to go to the soup kitchen, and one man, and they're seeing him, and they know who he is, and where is his bed? And she's asking the mom, where is his bed? And you're explaining that same concept to a little girl. And that became the basis of A Good Night for Mr. Coleman. And it's based on a true story of Eugene Coleman, who we did house in our pilot program. And he really became such an inspiration for raising the $10 million for the building, because when people were resistant or saying, well, those people don't want to be housed, those people prefer to be on the street, those people made bad choices, so why are we doing this? And I could bring Coleman to a meeting and have him talk with people and say, this is who you're afraid of, this is who you're talking about, let you listen to him, in his own words, tell his story. And he changed so many hearts and minds about what homelessness is and what it isn't, and what you think about people who are experiencing it. And so he's the center, the star of that book. His photos in the back of that book. And I paired with an illustrator here in Charlotte, Evelyn Henson, to do the illustrations. And it's funny, I'd given up graphic design thinking, what a career, it's over. It wasn't a meaningful career. Well, yeah, guess what I needed to do that children's book? I drew on all of my years of graphic design and storyboarding to create that book, and it's been really fun. And I'm doing another one this year called Grace Heard a Whisper, and it's about a little girl who listens to her inner knowing in her soul and tries to remind the grown-ups around her to listen as well. Yeah. So, and that's been a whole different fun journey with a different illustrator. So that'll come out hopefully by Christmas. So.
Fantastic. Grace Heard a Whisper kind of goes along with your book that is going to be published next year.
Yes, I ended up having an idea. The last chapter of the 100-Story Home is called Trust the Whisper, where I really dig into this idea that this was not my idea to decide to solve homelessness. This was something started by Denver that came to me, and it became my life. And as I would talk to people about the 100-Story Home, I think it gave them permission to kind of tell me their own whispers. So I would be in Birmingham, and someone would say to me, gosh, I'm feeling crazy and called to this whisper to do something around teens and runaway teens and homelessness. Or I would be in Raleigh, and I would hear about someone who started this amazing thing, and I would talk to her, and it turns out it was from a whisper. So I started collecting these stories, and at one point, probably 4 years ago, I started writing them down. I had about 11 chapters done. And then I realized, well, I don't know the end of these stories. I don't know if the woman in Alabama is going to actually follow through on her whisper. It's actually only a good story to tell others if she listens. And so I finished up The Last Ordinary Hour, and I kind of kept this book on hold. But then the story started playing out, because you know what? Carolyn Bundy in Birmingham, Alabama, opened the way station for teens last summer.
Wow.
And, Jackie Craig had the Green Chair Project in Raleigh, North Carolina, which inspired 3 women in Charlotte, North Carolina to open Furnished for Good, which is their own whispers. So I realized I had this collection of 20 stories, not only of people's whispers, but they were interconnected. The God dots were connecting with each other. So this new book that I sold to Baker Books and will come out next summer is called Trust the Whisper, Extraordinary Stories of Ordinary Grace. And it's about people who listened to their whispers and what happened.
I love it. It's so inspiring, and it's so fun to hear of people chasing their whispers, as you call them, and then succeeding, right?
Yes.
Because I think discouragement does a lot to, fear and discouragement do a lot to stall us or make us give up, maybe even before we've really gotten started.
So true. I mean, I remember that first night that I came home after Denver had spoken to me, and I hadn't said anything. I was feeling like, why did he say that to me? Why is it my job? I don't know. It was just like this whisper reverberating in my soul. And I decided to say something to my husband. I said, Denver Moore, he said this thing to me today. Like, maybe I should do something about it. I should, do something about housing. And my husband just looked at me and said, yeah, maybe that's going to be your 40-year thing. We've talked to each other about what's your 40-year thing. What would you spend 40 years on? And he said, maybe that's going to be your 40-year thing. And he didn't shoot it down, and he didn't say, hey, can I remind you that you're not qualified? And by the way, like, if you quit your job to go do that, I don't think it's going to pay very well. So how are we going to make none of that? He just, I don't know. He heard something real. He heard something that I wanted to do, and he encouraged it. And so that's one thing I would say. If you have a whisper, and you let it out, it's like a very fragile butterfly. Be careful who you let it out to, because don't let someone kill your dreams before they get started.
Yes.
And I don't know, trust your dreams with people who will encourage you and not tell you that you're crazy. They will say, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Or what could your first step be? Or how can I help you in that first step?
Yes.
Because I think that's how these things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That matters so much. Mm-hmm. I do think we can handle other people's dreams without the fragility that they deserve.
Yeah.
And is probably more detrimental than we think it is to other people.
Tara Moore has a couple of books that she writes on dreaming big and not playing small, but she has a great quote, be more loyal to your dreams than your fears. And I love that, because I think we sometimes give so much more airtime in our heads and our lives to our fears than we ever do to our dreams. Yep.
100%. So you have talked about being unqualified a couple of times, which I love. I think that, especially in our culture, there is this nobility, almost a morality placed on your qualifications for something.
Yes.
And I want to caveat by saying there are certain things that require qualifications.
Yes, degrees are good, schools are good.
Please don't try to be a doctor.
Yes, do not play a doctor. Do not.
No, I mean, and that has happened.
Brain surgery needs degrees.
Yes, exactly. There are things that you do actually need to be qualified for from an accredited university. So with that disclaimer out of the way,
yes,
I think there are far more things that we don't actually need to be qualified to start.
Yes. And I would add, if something matters to you, you can learn it.
Mm-hmm.
There, in the world of YouTube and Google, I mean, you can learn all kinds of things, online learning, executive coaching. There are so many ways to learn that are not necessarily a 4 years master's or PhD. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that. I mean, for a long time, I thought, well, if I'm going to write a book, I have to have an MFA in creative writing. And again, not to say MFAs in creative writing are wonderful, and those who are pursuing them, great.
Yeah.
But to write and publish a book, you don't actually need a degree from anywhere. So I do think it matters more what you're feeling pulled towards, what won't let you go. And then start saying your dream aloud and seeing, where do you need resources? Who might help you? How could you take a class? How could you take one step towards that dream and not discount it with, oh, I don't have a PhD or the time, so I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that experience, first of all, is the best teacher that you're ever going to get.
Yes. Trial by fire. I got a lot of trial by fire in my life.
It's, nothing beats it. even if you need a degree or whatever for what you're doing, your experience doing something will always trump a textbook or a video.
Yeah.
But also, I agree. I think your passion, what you're called to, if you have that in you, you will put in the work necessary to have that realized, right?
Yes. If it matters to you, you will figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because the not sleeping at night will necessitate that. You will have to figure it out so you can start to sleep at night.
So, Trust the Whisper is coming out next summer.
Yes.
And now you are, well, let's talk about your other things. You're a speaker, you run these workshops, you're helping other women. We've already talked a little bit about that. But how did you really get into that part of it? Because I'm sure when you wrote the 100-Story Home, there wasn't much in the future of what this is going to turn into.
No, I thought, okay, well, I'm feeling this whisper to write the book. I couldn't get a publisher. I couldn't get an agent. So I figured out self-publishing. It was important to me. So, yep, I had no degree, no experience. I figured out how to self-publish. I put it out. I realized I had to talk. So I just did it. I mean, and I still get nervous. There's not enough experience in the world that will make you stop sweating public speaking. But I just kept saying yes to the next thing. It was first, will you say yes to a book club and then bigger things. And then people would say, well, can you lead a workshop on writing? Because sounds like you know how to write. And what if you taught that? And, sounds like you know how to publish. Do you want to teach that? So I would do things in small group, kind of figuring it out, the idea of a pilot program in a non-threatening way. And now I've started to do bigger things, leading retreats. But I do a lot of, hey, I wonder if that's going to work. You know, kind of like what you were saying when you were starting this podcast, you were going to throw it on the wall and see what sticks. I've done a lot of that since then of what the 100-Story Home is turning into is realizing that it hits a nerve with people who have their own dreams of things that they're not sure that they can accomplish, and they want to talk about it and they want to work that out and they want to see what's possible in their lives. And that's how I've kind of ended up in this vein. And I think kind of my next piece is the idea of what's your whisper.
Yeah.
I mean, I love these stories that I've gathered in Trust the Whisper. And my hope is that people read that and start sending me these stories of, gosh, do you know about, Mary Nell in Iowa? Do you know what she's done? And not everyone's a storyteller. I would love to tell those stories about what their whispers are and what they've done. So we keep it going. So we keep people believing that they can do things because they keep hearing all these inspiring stories. So I have an idea to, start something on a newsletter or a blog that will be those stories. And I will say it aloud to you, Jen. Jen has inspired me to tell these stories, maybe in a podcast called What's Your Whisper? Because I've been so frightened of that. And then here is Jen right before me doing her own podcast. So really, is it that hard? Can I figure it out? I think she's here today to be my own God dot to tell me I think that could be possible. So thank you for your inspiration.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to show up. Yeah. And I absolutely think that you can do this. And I think it would be such a valuable voice. There's a lot of noise out there. But I am a firm believer in the people that need to hear are the ones that will hear,
Yes.
And to not get so caught up in, it's really easy and to get caught up in social media and the viral thing and how popular you are based on likes and downloads and all of that. But there really is something so special in knowing that an actual individual has been moved by a story that has been shared. And it has changed the way that they think about something or that they think about themselves. So, yeah, I think there is
Thank you. I needed to hear that message today. I had that message to myself when I was writing. I said, who cares how many people read it? There's 10 people out there who have a whisper, who are feeling crazy, and they need to read that you felt crazy too, and that you weren't qualified, and you did it anyway, and you figured it out. Find those 10 people.
Yeah.
And it did. That book found its way magically, and then it was picked up by a publisher, so it's found its way to more. And I still hear from people that I think, wow, how did that book get in their hands? Right?
Right? Yes.
Yeah. So, and there's nothing like that as a writer, to think no one's ever going to read your words. And then you hear from someone that you never would have known, and they're somehow now connected through their words, and that your words matter to them. Nothing better.
Beautiful. It's very true. It's very true. There is a lot goes into this, right? I mean, it's personal.
Yes. It's personal to be a writer. It's personal to do what you're doing, a podcaster, speak.
Yeah. Any passion that you have, anything you have a feeling towards, it's personal. You know, you can't separate it, even though you're trying to accomplish something, right? So I get it. I get why it's hard. I have those same fears. I'm constantly battling with myself on what I should be doing or worried about versus what I actually find myself being worried about.
Right.
But it is such a joy to know, or to, when you hear from those people, or you get that feedback that, wow, keep going, because this does matter.
Yes. So a message to listeners: if Jen and her words are striking you, shoot her an email or a text. If you read a book at some point that mattered to you, shoot that author a text or an email. I mean, you probably don't have their phone number, but shoot them an email or go on their website and tell them, because you'd be surprised how few times people do that. Even if you just spent all of lunch telling your friend what a great book you just read, you probably didn't tell that author. Tell them, I'm telling you, there is nothing better. And most authors are like me. We don't have people. We're reading our own emails. We're answering our own emails. And to hear from someone is really amazing. So do it.
Agreed. Yes, it is. It helps. It goes a long way.
It does.
It truly does. But I am excited for the podcast, for your podcast.
Oh, well, there's some pressure, Jen. Thanks.
Good. I will be following up, because I think there is such value in storytelling. And again, no matter, I am also a big believer in abundance, and there is room for everyone, and everyone's voice is unique, right? So you have something that nobody else brings to the table. Your perspective is completely unique. And so I absolutely believe that the people are going to show up, it's going to show up. So I love it.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome. So besides the podcast, what else are you hoping for in the future? What are your next steps? I mean, I know you're getting a book off the ground, so
I'm interested in the ripple effect from this work. I'm interested that someone reads a book, takes a workshop, comes to a retreat, listens to a podcast, and imagines what might happen for them. And I may never know that. I probably will never know. But to me, I don't think I have another more place or hope way in me, but I hope I can be a small part in someone else's, and knowing that they heard something, they were inspired by something that helped them say, okay, I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And believe that they can.
Yeah. I think that that's very possible.
So I'm interested in a tsunami for good.
I like that.
So ripples that become a tsunami for good, because I think the world needs some good.
Absolutely. Well, and you alluded to this earlier, that we all have something placed on our hearts, right?
I do. I think each one of us kind of comes into this world with something imprinted that is ours to do. And I don't think it's necessarily just one thing, but I think when you think about what breaks your heart, that is unique for every single person. And I think somewhere in the middle of what breaks your heart, or what breaks your heart open, is why you came here.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure that out and connect with it before your expiration date, either expected or aspirational, is part of why we're here.
Yeah.
So I think if I can be a part of helping people to connect to who they were always meant to be, that to me is hopefully my highest and best use.
Sure. Yeah. And it's a journey too, because especially in the age of information that we have, it can be very overwhelming. Everything seems like it needs help, right? Yes. And so it can be difficult to feel like, well, how do I how is my contribution going to mean anything? You know, I'm one person in one area of the world doing one project, right? But if everybody thinks...
What if everybody did?
Right.
What if everybody did their one little part in their one little corner of the world? How could we change things in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I think trial and error too gets you there.
Yes.
You know, I'm not the same person that I was 10, 20 years ago. And that's good. You know,
Yes.
you grow with your experiences.
Yes.
So, well, that's fantastic. I am so looking forward to reading your books, and I love the children's books. I have to get those for my nieces. So
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I will send you out of here with signed copies for your nieces and now a little push that I need to get on. I don't think it's an accident you were here today. I don't believe in coincidence, Jen.
Yeah, me either. But I think you are also what I needed at this time too, because just hearing your story has been, and just the way that you speak about life and opportunity is really important. And again, it can just be really easy to get frustrated with where you are and where you think you should be.
Yes.
But I am slowly learning and having to continually remind myself that success looks completely different sometimes than we imagine it to be.
Yes.
And there are many measures of success. And so are you going to be open to what those different things look like?
My friend Meg Robertson, who's a life coach, says the definition of success is getting up in the morning so excited to go do whatever it is that you're meant to do, and being equally excited to come home and either share it with your family or in your sanctuary space, and finding the balance between the two of wanting to go up and wake up and do things in the world, but also coming home to yourself and those that are dear.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction because we can burn out on passion. When we start, we like to think that it's this never-ending source of power within us, and it's not.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah. So that's very good advice. So I do ask one question of everybody at the end of each episode because of the value in stories and our experiences. I think it gives us each a unique perspective on life. So through the lens of your experience, what does compassion mean to you?
Gosh, are you going to edit out the long pause here?
Yes.
Good. I think compassion just means believing that everybody has a story to tell. And especially I think about when people see someone on the streets and they might not imagine what their story is or how they got there, and they make a judgment about it. Just believing, as my friend Coleman would say, that's not who they are, that's who they became. So trying to be gentle with each other and ourselves about who we authentically are and who we might have become, but who we were meant to be. So I think compassion is being gentle with ourselves and others about our story, how we got here, and chapters yet to write.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I love that that phrase. It's not who you are, it's who
you've become. Eugene Coleman did a talk recently for police officers, and he tried to ask them or tell them, I know it's really hard. Your job is really hard. You're finding people on the streets and they're not at their best, and it's difficult. But try to remember, you're meeting them not as who they are, but who they became.
Yeah. It's so important. That is a beautiful reminder. Because the reality is we all are capable of being in those situations.
Yes.
We think we're so far away from it, but we're not.
We're not.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Well, beautiful answer. So everything, your website and your books will be linked in the show notes. Are you on social media for people to find you?
I am. I like Instagram. It's the one place where I try to talk with readers. So Instagram at Kathy Izard CLT or Women, Faith, and Story. are our two places on Instagram where I connect with readers. And I do have a website, kathyizard.com and womenfaithstory.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure to meet you.
Such a pleasure for me. Meant to be.
Yes, truly. Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours, so be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.